Welcome to SHOWstudio, Paris Fashion Week, and it's the Dior show. And Dior is Paris, Paris is Dior. It's very exciting. I've got an amazing set of panellists with me to help unpick what Raf Simons is doing at the House of Christian Dior for Spring Summer 15. But before we start unpicking what we've seen in Paris and what we think of Raf's work there, I'll let you guys just introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about what you do. Starting with you, Heather.
So my name's Heather Sproat and I'm a senior lecturer on BA Fashion at Central St Martin's.
My name's Kathryn Ferguson. I'm a film director and a fashion film research fellow. Fashion film research fellow at London Culture Fashion. Good God.
Are you sure?
It's a new job.
I'm Amber Butchart. I'm a fashion historian and associate lecturer at London College of Fashion. It's a very strong University of the Arts contingent going on here.
I'm Harriet, Verney, and I'm a writer.
That's short and sweet. Can't mess that up. I want to start by asking you guys about what we think, because we were just kind of mentally all running through Raf's collections just before we went live and talking about what's been going on. What do we think of what? Because he's really in his stride now. You know, you can't really talk about it, sort of as if it's anything new. But what do we think about what Raf Simons does at Dior? How would we sum up his kind of version of Dior? Someone has to answer me. Heather.
Fresh.
Go.
Fresh. It's fresh. I think it really is. You know, he's bringing his contemporary edge to everything he's doing, and not having seen what he's done for the next season. I hope that still applies, but I really do think it's fresh. It really is kind of a new feeling.
And it doesn't feel very seasonal, does it? No. It feels very kind of like they all kind of do somewhat blur into one. But I mean that in a really good way, where it feels like a kind of like a suggestion of what a house should be, rather than a kind of I'm thinking about this season. I'm thinking about this. It's quite. It's an interesting one. What do you think of it, Amber and Kathryn?
Well, it's quite sophisticated, I think. I think it was quite a clever move bringing him into Dior, because it's quite a break from the Galliano days.
Yeah.
And the high theatrics and real sort of extravagance of that. He manages to sort of keep an element of that, but really refine it into something quite modern and quite streamlined, I think. So it was quite a clever sort of departure, I think, for the brand to take him on.
What do you think of the imagery that they put out, Kathryn, and the kind of, because they're not massive users of fashion film, it's quite kind of conservative in the kind of.
I was thinking about that before I got here. They've got such an eclectic mix of fashion films from the last 5 years, from the David Lynch Lady Blue Shanghai epic, 15-minute epic, then through to the Harmony Korine Dior Attic Perfume ad recently. I mean, it's a real mix, but they seem to work a lot with Hollywood directors or American directors.
What do you think of that? Because we're seeing a lot of that, you know, also not just kind of Hollywood directors, but like Mrs. Prada with Wes Anderson, that kind of. Do you think what does that say about that we're not seeing fashion image makers used to do film so much?
I think there's a lot of fashion image makers still making an awful lot of fashion brand films and advertising. But I think it mixes it up. I think it's good. I think it's nice to have narrative. It's also nice to have spectacular imagery, and I think it's good to have it all, really. I do like the storytelling within the advertising. I think it's engaging. It's good.
Would you like to see a more, because I don't feel like we've seen Raf's vision in film. I feel like there is, as you say, there's a lot of fashion film associated with the House of Dior, but often it feels like it's a perfume or this or that. It doesn't feel like we've seen a kind of Raf film. Do you think he's a designer whose work would suit film?
Yeah, I mean, his work's very wearable. I mean, and I imagine would work probably well in a narrative film as opposed to anything that's too dramatic and Dior-esque, you know. So I would love to see him.
Yeah.
We'll have to get him on the phone.
Kathryn, we'll make a film for you. Okay.
But I think it's great, and I love these collections, and I love his colour palette, and I do love how wearable everything is. It's a nice change.
No, absolutely.
It's good.
What's your take on it, Harriet?
I don't know, I think Raf Simons got off to a really rocky start, actually, with Dior. It's too loud, it's sort of like that scattergun approach. Like just do everything and hope one thing works. But I think he's evolved, and these collections are a lot better, and his silhouette is more defined than what it used to be.
Yeah.
But I love the extravagance of Dior and what, what it used to be like.
Yeah.
But I do think and I like dress coats. I haven't seen dress coats in a long time. I like that he's doing that in the full skirt.
Yeah.
And he's bringing that back, and that's more Dior. But at first, I really didn't think he was at all Dior.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you say a tall Dior, this is actually something that's specifically what I wanted to ask you all about, because I think for a lot of people, when they say so Dior, they mean Galliano's Dior, you know, and especially because, you know, Mr.
Well, not
Dior
necessarily, I just mean like that silhouette of the, you know, the Dior woman, which is a tiny waist, has beautiful fitted jacket, the Victorian ones, and a big skirt, and I thought Galliano played with that a lot, but I thought at first Rafton, he completely ignored it, which is fine. But
I always felt like they had to do that. There had to be that break from Galliano because of the way it happened and everything. And I mean, I'm with you. I prefer the extravagance and the theatricality of the Galliano days, but I feel like for the brand, it almost felt like a political decision. Like they had to sort of rein it in.
But then, do we not think? Because one of the things that I found quite interesting, and I've got the show notes for this season, and there's a lot of talk in them about the 18th century, and I think we saw that with the couture. Some of the pieces, they did look like references to Galliano Dior, and I'm just interested to get you guys' opinion. That isn't that equally as valid if we saw. It wouldn't be as literal as Raf referencing Galliano, but isn't it important that's such a part of the house's heritage? Do we not want to see that brought in as much as we want to see the bar jackets and the new look brought into what Raf's doing? And do you guys agree that he has kind of moved slightly more into doing things that are a bit more kind of chime with the Galliano vision of Dior?
I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the presentation and styling, that in a Galliano show there was so much work on the atmosphere, on the scene setting. You know, I was there at Gardner Austerwitz when the train came chuffing in with whoever standing on the front, and all the Indians and the 2 tons of red sand that had been shipped in to the and all the cases, and you know, it was part of the theatre. And I think particularly from the couture show, some of those clothes, had they been styled in a completely different way, could have carried across that. But I think it was a very political decision that actually they had to draw the line and say, no, actually we want this modern, slightly futuristic vision of Dior, and we want to step into the next century, and it was a very bold move.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that, just, I know I'm preempting the show a little bit, but he's talking for this show about bringing, as a couple of things, he's talking about democratising the traditions of haute couture and taking them into the ready-to-wear. And he's also talking a lot about thinking about what is modernity and thinking about a lot of history, particularly kind of French court 18th century dress. And I think that's something interesting for someone like Raf Simons, because that feels quite a new thing for him to be exploring. Because I feel like his Dior before, it's interesting you say futuristic, and I wonder if that's starting to change. Or do we think that's important, that it doesn't stay so kind of modernist, or are we happy with it being modernist?
I think it's important to bring those elements of history in, because that's always been associated with the brand. Like, you know, from 1947, when it was very much about referencing a Victorian silhouette.
Exactly.
I kind of feel like they needed to make a clean break, and now it feels like they're kind of creeping back into that kind of territory of the brand.
Do you guys agree that there's a bit of creeping? I feel like there was a real definitive, this is what I'm about, and I feel like that is kind of easing out a little bit, and it's becoming slightly more. I can't imagine him doing the 18th century for his first collection, for example.
If he's really clever about it, he'll make it so that everyone's different interpretation. You won't really know where the inspiration's from, and then something has longevity, and it doesn't become part of a trend. I think that's what Galliano was very good at. So you'd be like, oh, is that Art Deco, is that Victorian, what is it? And you don't really know, therefore can't we pinpoint to a moment in time, which is quite clever. So hopefully he can do that. So it's not too minimalist and futuristic, but it's not too traditionalist as well.
Have any of you bought Dior or worn Dior from Raf Simons?
No.
Tried it on?
Well, a lot of us work at universities, I'm assuming we don't earn enough.
But I feel like fashion people, they do buy high fashion, even if they buy one piece a year. But it's interesting because I don't know many fashion people that buy Dior, which isn't, like so many people would save up and buy Celine, for example, or they'll save up and buy Balenciaga or what have you. But I don't know a woman that saves to buy Dior.
Nowadays? Old Dior, I like old Dior, I'll buy that.
Yeah. Who do we think the Dior woman is then?
French?
That's a really difficult question now, I think, actually.
I think it probably is more international. Honestly, I don't think that the market for the clothing in the UK is, they'd probably ring up and say, no, we're selling loads and loads of garments. You may be, but I honestly don't think a lot of those people, unless they're wags, are
buying it. You said you've got students who are working there. Do they like working at Dior?
I think they have a fantastic time. They learn so much. They do work really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's part of the placement year that they do, and they come back full of confidence, having experimented on kind of hundreds of different techniques. So it's, for them, it's a really valuable experience, and they are the select few. It's not like a lot go. They do all come and interview a whole bunch of kind of our best, and we'll just take a few.
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you find, we were talking just before we went live as well about, because I think there's a lot of kind of murmuring in fashion at the moment about Raf Simons and the menswear, because obviously the men's is still done by Chris Van Ash, and Raf Simons is a menswear designer. That's how he kind of cut his teeth. Would we like to see him given all of Dior? I know we were talking practicalities, that would be a huge amount of collections to do, but do we think it's kind of odd that he's just started doing the women's when he's got this crazy amazing menswear background?
I think because he was at Giasander, that was kind of their reason for choosing him, and like I say, from my experience, I think he works really, really hard all the time, and I wouldn't want to push him towards a breakdown.
Yeah. Remember what we were saying the other day about menswear designers becoming womenswear designers, and it's more about detailing. So here, I think with his tailoring, it's more about where a button's placed and what stitch is used. Yeah. And that's what menswear designers are great at, about the details. Yeah. I think he's quite good at that. You can't really tell on the photos, but what you said about something up close, it's very different, isn't it?
It's interesting actually when you talk about the detailing, because that feels, I think, quite luxurious now. I think a house like Dior, you do go for it and expect that kind of impeccable focus. It does in a way seem quite apt to have someone. It's interesting that you mentioned that debate, because we were talking a lot on our last panel about why we're seeing so many menswear designers really, really succeeding in high profile positions at womenswear houses. Do you guys have any thoughts on why that is? Is it just literally just a fluke, or is there a reason?
I mean, I think they do an awful lot of development into details, and have loads and loads of work in front of them to choose from, and then it is very much about what's chosen and where it's placed. I think it's really difficult for us to judge what we're seeing, because having seen some of those garments much closer, there's so much more that goes into them which just doesn't come across on a photograph. I think menswear designers are trying to make things which in a way are slightly more timeless.
That's do you have any thoughts on it, you guys? Because it's a weird one, isn't it? I think it's really hard, because it is happening and it's a big thing at the moment, but then it's kind of, I think it's very easy to be like, oh, it's just a fluke, but then I think there is something in it.
It seems to be quite indicative of the sort of the merging of menswear and womenswear that's happening anyway. It's been sort of in the air for a few years, obviously sort of like spearheaded people like J.W. Anderson. It seems to be all sort of tying into that, the idea that, I mean, collections seem to be getting less seasonal, but they also seem to be getting slightly less gender specific. I mean, obviously within reason, but there does seem to be a fluidity to that. That seems to be quite a fairly recent phenomenon, I think.
No, sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Let's also talk, I just want to speak a little bit about the function of the catwalk show, and I'm really interested to have you here for this, because I think we've spoken a lot about the catwalk show being used as kind of an advertising tool, and I'm interested, do you think that it's being treated more like an ad campaign, or almost like a fashion film? Often they're streamed in a way that looks so beautiful, and I think with Dior, Dior catwalk imagery is very, very beautifully done. You see it a lot, and you see it in lots of magazines, because it's a big advertiser. Do you think that brands are approaching the catwalk almost like, similarly to an ad campaign?
I don't think enough, to be honest. I think a lot of catwalks have become incredibly austere and stripped back, and God forbid if you had to travel around for a month and watch them constantly. I think there's so much space for much, for performance. Like the Dior Galliano shows, I mean, they're absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, it's really odd, isn't it, that kind of like fantasy has gone away, even though that wasn't seen by. You think brands really want to do that now, given how many people see catwalk imagery, but
I think it's a real missed trick. Is it money?
Yeah.
Truth
The
unknown
amount of money that
lots
was
of
spent
it.
on some of those shows is
crazy.
And it was very exclusive, so it wasn't being able to travel, so maybe they're putting their money into the public facing.
But let's not forget,
advertising campaign.
Raf Simons' first collection at Dior, the room was filled with kind of like 1 million live flowers. That wasn't going to be cheap. It's just a very different kind of theatre, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, houses like Dior will always have fantastic shows, but I just think in general there is still there's a big void of possible spectacle that could be happening, and theatre. I mean, the theatre of fashion. I'm sure you think a lot about that.
I mean, I can't help thinking it's sort of part and parcel of the sort of austerity era, and that kind of conservatism sort of filtering through into the catwalk shows. I mean, brands don't have as much money. People aren't buying as much. That was a lot of the stuff that was written about the Milan shows, I think, wasn't it? The profits have dropped. Brands just don't have the money that they had a few years ago to put into those kind of theatrics. And also there's also an argument to be made that do people really want to see that much money being spent on this like 10-minute spectacle that is an amazing advert for the brand, but you've got to kind of be wary of the economic climate and how that actually looks. I mean, does it actually maybe look incredibly gauche to be doing those kind of theatrics that you're used to in more, economically buoyant times? I think that could possibly be part and parcel of it. But I definitely miss it. I love, the catwalk should be theatre, I think. It is theatre. And I would like to see it
used in that way.
Yeah, like a circus.
Picking up on that, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think you can't underestimate. I love pushing my students to go to the shows. We generally go over in the spring. You can't underestimate the power of the live show, the music, the setting, the atmosphere, the styling, the hair. How that completely changes your perception, the music they play, of what those garments mean, all the subliminal messages that the designer just whacks you with, bang, 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 because it's suddenly like, oh, I get it, oh, that's so clever, all of that becomes a very convincing tool.
Should Fashion Week then be open to sort of the public? Because I think, a lot of kind of fashion journalists would go, no, it's a trade show, it's about showing clothes to industry, but then I don't think it is anymore. I don't think anyone quite knows what the fashion industry is, what the Fashion Week is for. Is it for showing clothes to buyers? They all go to a showroom and see a completely different commercial collection anyway. Is it about brand building? And in that case, you think, it's really odd that brands are putting so much focus into live streaming and social media to get the show out there. You think, why aren't they then sort of putting more of a focus on having the public there?
Logistically, it wouldn't work though, would it?
I don't know.
It's also budget. You're a designer, and if people who are important for you to get to see your garments are the buyers and the press, because they're the people who are going to drive your sales. As great as it is to let a few people in, and anyone who's desperate will get in. I've seen it happen 1 million times. It's too expensive. Those models are on a clock. You can't afford to be, opening your doors and bringing another 400 people, where one of the photographers or one of the buyers may get put at the back, and then that's it. I think it's economics.
Fashion is elitist, though, in some ways. I think the general public can see it. We can see it live stream and whatnot.
But because you guys are one of the first to do live streaming, everybody's doing it now. What do you think about that? And how successful as a tool is it?
It's a tricky one, because I feel like there's a lot of really bad live streaming, the same way there's a lot of really bad fashion film, and I kind of feel like streaming, you're right, when we kind of really early on started doing it, like with Plato's Atlantis and stuff, it almost felt kind of like a novelty, whereas now, I think there's this pressure that everyone feels they have to do it, and I think now you do almost have to treat it like a fashion film and have it done beautifully, and I think houses like, it's sad, it comes back to money, but like the British Fashion Council are great at doing in London, but the best streams are houses like Vuitton and Prada, which are streamed so perfectly, you know, kind of Burberry do it well as well, where it's kind of right in on the accessories. And I think now that's kind of what you need to do. I think it's not enough just to kind of put a camera at the end of the runway. You almost have to treat it really, really...
That's interesting. I haven't seen any for a while. Is it much more cinematic now?
Much more cinematic, you know, much more a focus on vibe and you know, even just like most streams include people coming in at the start, you know, and it's not just kind of people taking their seats, it's kind of cameras will go and film the kind of big celebrities sat there on the front row, and I think that's important, but I think that's leaving a lot of brands behind because it's making people who could afford to stream. Now their streams are kind of
next level.
And their streams that are just dedicated to the clothes don't really seem like enough for now. There's kind of this next level of kind of streaming that's all about the vibe.
Do they get a huge amount of viewers?
I don't know. That's one thing that I find quite interesting when you see, because there's some brands that quite randomly stream. Like I was thinking this yesterday because Balmain actually streamed. They did a really terrible stream. It didn't really work properly. But I was thinking about it and I thought, you know, who is I understand things like Chanel and Dior and even kind of the London ones. But I thought a house like Balmain, I wonder who is that person going, I can't wait to watch the Balmain show. You know, it's quite, I know, because I always think the kind of people that watch streams are real fashion fanatics, and I wonder if, I think you have to think about who your stream is for, and I think that's why Burberry have been so successful, because they've been like, oh, it's not for fashion fans, it's for our shopper. Whereas I think a lot of brands that just stream because everyone else does, but I think you almost have to think of the stream as a branding exercise, and what is it for? Is it for obsessives and fashion students, and it's not going to make any money for you, or is it about trying to get people to buy stuff? And that's such a change. If you think, you know, like 5-10 years ago, no one was streaming at all, and then if you did, it was. So that's quite interesting. But I think that goes back to what I was saying about how the way the show has changed, and I think brands think about what their catwalk imagery is for now, and is it about selling products? Is it about this? Is it about that? I think it's really, it's an interesting topic. I'm interested by what we were saying. I want to pick up on that idea that you mentioned, Emma, about how part of the reason that we don't see these great theatrical shows is kind of the economic climate. And I was wondering, just to go back to also the appointment of Raf Simons, are we putting too much focus on Galliano and this whole decision of Raf as being a kind of like a flip from Galliano and them saying, oh, we're going to, like, he went left, so we're going to go right, that kind of a thing? Or is it also that Raf Simons' appointment, it's in a similar way, that this kind of fashion feels more appropriate for the times? You know, it doesn't feel as, in the same way you don't want to have a kind of huge, big train extravaganza, you also don't want to have kind of big ball gowns anymore. Is that part of the appointment, do you think, just this notion of what's appropriate high fashion now?
Yeah, I think so. I think it kind of marked a bit of a cultural shift, really, that Galliano getting fired kind of coincided with that whole, you know, period, economic downturn and everything, and I think it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And at the same time, it kind of, in a way, it almost sort of marked the end of that big star name couturier idea, where the personality of the designer is almost not stronger than the collections, but is as important to the brand in a way as.
That's what I find very interesting about what's happening at Loewe, and I say this because we just did a Loewe panel literally like an hour and a half ago, and I think they've really gone for that old school kind of J.W. Anderson is everything to them, you know, his aesthetic is exactly what the Loewe aesthetic is, and that's it's kind of very much the star designer thing, and I think you're totally right. I don't think we've seen that in a while. Like, appointments like Wang at Balenciaga, or even Raf at Dior, it's very much like Dior, Raf Simons, whereas I feel like with Loewe it's J.W. Anderson Loewe, which is interesting. I wonder if we're going to see a turn back to that a little bit, where people are realising how important vision is. I don't know, what's your take on it, Heather?
I think it was really interesting with the Loewe collection, because although they may have made a big thing out of it, I thought that the collection did seem very Loewe, and I wouldn't have recognised it. It wasn't too difficult. I thought it worked very well. It wasn't too kind of tricky in a way that it was making, you know, some little funny turns, which seemed very J.W. Anderson. So I felt he'd really worked to their strength, and it did feel, again, fresh and modern.
But are they letting him be a star designer in the kind of old?
Well, I think they
needed that.
I think they needed a face, didn't they? It's not like Dior. Dior's Dior, but Loewe's a bit It doesn't really know its own image. So having J.W. Evanson is great for them, I think.
Because it's interesting, because we seem to kind of be agreeing that there's a death of the kind of big narrative show, and there's a bit of a death of the star designer, and is there also a death of the kind of star clothing? You know, it's so rare to see a show that's kind of mind-numbingly opulent and crazy and pieces incredibly theatrical. Who still does that anymore?
Well,
but
we love it because it's intellectual and it's clever, and actually you have all of that for the press, and the next day they show another selling collection to the buyers, which is completely private.
But it's not kind of opulent com, is it? You know, it's extravagant,
not,
but it's not. Yeah. But it's so rare to see. I found that really interesting this season, and I've said this a few times, but the predominance of evening wear in London, I thought some of the London shows were actually a lot more kind of, you know, opulent and glitzy and ornate than the Paris or Milan shows. You know, look at something like Mary Catransu, it's so much more kind of like
Simone's
luxurious.
one, which is like in that church, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, which is really, really interesting.
It's because of non-core, isn't it? Whatever that thing is.
But
I hate it.
Is that the only reason though?
No, but I just think people are buying into that. But this sort of reminds me of Victoria Beckham, that sort of image you've got on the screen.
Yeah.
You know, when they released her figures saying how much she sold this year, you're like, who is buying that?
Yeah.
So I just don't think, if I invest in something, I want to invest in extravagance and opulence and something that's inconceivable to my own small brain. But that is sort of, it's just a nice white dress, isn't it?
So why are people shying away from looking really showy? Is it going back to an economic climate thing? Do you think people just feel like it's not very tasteful to be
I think it's the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That influenced by lots of things. Yeah, it's a shame.
You just want everyone to be like in a Galliano bias cut, a huge fur and like a pom-pom on their
That
head.
would be my favourite thing, yeah.
And shall we have a look at what he's done for this season? I do just want to pick up a little bit on this notion that he's talked about from the show notes, where he says democratising the traditions of haute couture by taking them into the realm of ready to wear, because I think a lot of people when he started doing his couture said that it looked a lot like ready to wear. And are we intrigued to see a bit of a merging of the two? What does that sort of say about his vision? You're nodding there, what's your take on it?
I just think it's really interesting. I love haute couture. I spent a year at Dior in the atelier, and anything that is kind of bringing forward those traditions and those techniques and letting other people have access to them, particularly in the ready to wear, for me is great. Even it doesn't matter, you know, how and where. It's a really different way about thinking about clothing.
And it is interesting because I think with the Hussein thing at B&A, you know, there's been a kind of sense of lots of demi couture, which I think is interesting because I almost feel like it makes sense to see the couture techniques done in a ready-to-wear context, because I question if, I think people want that kind of level of workmanship, and they want something that feels really one-off and really special, but I don't know if people want to give up their time in that old way, so it kind of feels really smart to see, and it's sad because it means people don't care as much about fit, but then you think, you know, if there are these women who want to buy something really, really great and they do want it really fast, it makes sense to see, because no one seems to want slow fashion anymore, sadly. But
You wait.
But if you could buy this right now, it wouldn't work because it's spring summer. So it's kind of weird when they do that. You can buy something straight away.
But do you think that the seasons mean anything? I think everything's so international.
They do in England.
Yeah.
When it's cold, it's really cold.
But then if you think like England's such a small, you know, we're not even the ones buying the London designers. Like, the biggest markets.
But America, same thing. I mean, New York, and, you know, the seasons are quite.
Yeah.
So I was reading an interview with Dries Van Noten, and he says the reason he doesn't do campaigns or make people be able to click and buy is because of seasons. He's like, it's stupid.
Yeah.
And he's focusing mainly back to performance, so he focuses completely on his show, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't really have an ad campaign at all, does he? No. So I think that's quite interesting.
That is interesting. What do we think of the mass of white? I'll just give you guys some notes on the collection. So it's Providence, looking forwards and backwards to prepare for the future through a dynamic sampling and remixing of history. Raf Simons, gates and exploration of the past combined with ideas of a near future, democratising the traditions of haute couture by taking them into the realm of the pret-a-porter. And then he says, in the last haute couture show, I was interested in the process of finding something extremely modern through something very historical. particularly through a juxtaposition of different themes. For this collection, I wanted to continue. I thought there was more to explore by beginning with the ingredients and the form and language of the couture, but going further, I wanted the ready-to-wear to feel more modern, more dynamic, more real. I wanted it to be made available to a wider audience, so that's quite interesting. And it says, eschewing strict historical accuracy and embracing an amalgamation in the imagination, the historical sprawl of the collection spans influences from the 18th century onwards. It takes an 18th century French royal court attire of both sexes and similarly synthesises and mixes ideas from the uniforms of pilots and astronauts, even schoolgirls and skaters. So that's very Raf Simons, which is nice to see. As the robe à la Française, a variation on traditional dresses of the 18th century, an amalgam of styles mostly worn with the new form of panniers and t-shirt bodices, becomes the flight suit à la Française. So the justacorps and gilets, the masculine court coats of the 18th century, kind of move into the street aesthetic of skater shorts and the fluid form of godette dresses. And they talked again about like Edwardian travel through time and history. So I like this idea. He's talking, it's quite interesting because it feels like this collection is literally about merging Dior with Raf Simons, which is quite fun. Are we reading that from what we're seeing? Because, you know, he's amazingly interested in streetwear and street culture and skate culture and subculture and lots of S words there.
I'm totally distracted by the lady in pink. She looks like she's in a Fellini film. She's amazing. But that's not the best placement of somebody in that colour.
She has truly photobombed the Dior shirt.
I really like this shape, the one that's just gone off. And there was one before as well, the one in the middle, and then there was one earlier as well. But it almost looks flat, like it looks
like number 8.
Just the next one along, number 6 there. Yeah. That's amazing, and I think that like Dior really is all about silhouette, isn't it? It's very much sort of silhouette, like led almost, like from the very beginning.
Well, it's interesting that nipped in waist, but then the fact that it comes in again, it's really modern. It's kind of that kind of bagginess, which is interesting.
Well, I think also the fact that black vest top, he's cut the silhouette so that it would be down to that tiny waist.
Yeah.
But because it's modern and he doesn't want to put her in a corset, he's just slashed those bits out so she can be, much more sportswear-like, I think.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting how he kind of makes the parallels between really historical dress and sports. So I thought that a lot with the corseting from last season, that we were literally just looking at when I remembered it. It kind of, on one hand, looked like, almost like kind of sports, almost like kind of, army gear or something, but then it was lacing of a corset. And I think that's a really interesting, the way he finds parallels in things that seem completely opposite, you know, a baggy pair of skate shorts or a full skirt, you know, and he manages to kind of combine that, which is really interesting.
Looks like a Victorian 90, doesn't it?
It's interesting because we talked about him as a great colourist, and other than the photo-bombing pink coat lady, there's not much. Kind of maybe I'm speaking too soon, but it's interesting how he really kind of segues between doing stuff that's really black and white, loads and loads of colour, really black and white, loads and loads of colour.
But that jacket number 16, the sleeve cut looks very, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's very historical looking with the sleeves, and then it's just a bomber, which I think is fantastic.
I like the collars they're doing. That thick collar, like number 17. I think that's really beautiful.
One thing that I always find odd when watching Raf Dior collections, and it's not really a criticism, but I feel like there's looks that kind of part of a theme, like 19. Then you get these kind of anomaly looks that look like they're bits of product put in. And I feel that a lot with his collections where you're like, okay, I get it, that's part of what he's thinking about, and then this is just a piece of product. Like I felt that a bit with 18. It looks like it's just kind of, can you just scroll back to 18? It looks a little bit just kind of plopped in there between two looks that are working with a theme.
They're more sellable or something.
Yeah.
I don't like those belts.
You're not a fan of it?
No.
Was there anything in the notes about what this print is? Because it's really hard to see on these pictures, isn't it? But it's like it keeps coming up. It's almost like a very tiny scale, like.
Well, he's talked of a layering of traditional silk jacquard that appear as a purposeful stratification of history, while micro jacquard. So I wonder if it's not a print.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
There
it's pretty.
That's much nicer, isn't it?
It looks like a lily of the valley, which would make sense unless I've just gone completely blind. It looks like the top of a flower.
But also really kind of 18th century early chintz kind
Yeah.
of motif.
What do you think about the fact that he said, sorry, just go back to the runway list. What do you think about the fact that he's talked in the show notes of I want it to be made available to a wider audience?
He wants to sell more.
But does this feel more accessible?
Yeah, but I don't know what the prices are. So
Yeah.
that's what really determines it. If I was a buyer.
Yeah. I just don't know if, I know we've only seen not that many looks, but I don't know if this feels any more kind of diverse or open than previous work. Doesn't smack of something that's trying to kind of...
It's even more austere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So stripped back.
Maybe he's trying to have something for the customers who already go in, who are going to buy Dior because they love Dior.
Yeah.
But he actually wants to open it up to a few of the kind of slightly cooler
Fashion.
shoppers, so they can get it a little bit more.
Yeah, because it does feel like the most Raf collection that we've seen. You know, he's let bits creep in before, like his crests that he's obsessed with. But
This is like that's the skater shorts. Isn't
yeah,
it?
exactly.
Isn't it?
And we had the kind of schoolgirl section before.
I feel like it looks like he hasn't followed through with an idea. You know, like if you're about to do a graduate collection, you know, they have to do all the preliminaries, and they've stopped halfway through and gone, oh, there we are. I just feel like it's a bit unfinished and you can't take it a bit further.
What would you like to have seen him push more?
Shapes, the necks, I don't know, I just feel... Can we go back a few? Just the coats and like the way those are cut, I just think being a girl, you know, I couldn't wear something like that. I think it's really unflattering. I don't think those thick straps are very, you know, pretty. Maybe a really nice long sleeve jacket a bit better as that. Tight sleeves.
It's almost like an apron or something.
Yeah, it's really odd.
I do really like the jacket in 26. I think that's really cool. But then I think it's styled in a really, really great way. But you imagine that could look quite aging, I think, if you wore that.
It's like neck, isn't it? And just a little tie. Like.
Well, it's really interesting because I really love what he does. And I went and I tried on one of the bar jackets, the suit, and it was cut in a way that it felt very old fashioned when you actually put it on. You know, like very kind of, even just the cut of the sleeves, they're very wide cut. You know, it didn't feel like a kind of throw on modern jacket at all. It felt very stiff. Yeah, and there was nothing about it that kind of felt cool on, which is interesting.
And
it felt very
ignores your boobs, doesn't it, when we're 26? Flat ones open.
I do like it when I can see that it feels more him though, and I think that's what's making me happy about this. But then I just don't know if the girl that would want to be a cool Raf Simons girl would ever buy Dior. I think she would just buy the Raf menswear, or she'd buy, like, seek out old stuff he did for Jill Sander. I don't know, it's interesting. Do you like what you're seeing, Kathryn?
I'm not sure what to say. Parts of it. I'm quite shocked compared to last season. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but it's very non-committal over here.
I know what you mean. I really hate this styling of the white dress and the knee-length white
Really
dress and the knee-high black base. I'm really not keen on that. I really liked the really tulip silhouettes that we were seeing. I thought that was going to be really interesting. And the idea of recreating some sort of like 18th century jacquard or early chintz or something, I really like that. And that doesn't seem to be happening anymore.
Yeah.
Which I'm sad about.
I think it's interesting he's talked about, because I think it's what we were saying before about menswear and womenswear borrowing from each other so much recently, and I do think it's interesting that he's looked at 18th century dress and brought elements of menswear from that into women's. I know that's not a particularly new idea.
Well, I just don't think, I think he hasn't, sometimes you go to a show, everything is laid out on a platter, it's exciting, but there's a fantastic flow and you just get it all the way through and you think, you really get into the designer's head, and the way that it's communicated, you know, works and it's easy.
Yeah.
In terms of flow, the show, from what we can see on screen, because I think it's very different when you're there and you can actually, you know, there may be...
especially because it's a round space, so imagine you see more girls at the same time.
And there may be things in the fabrics which are repeated, which make, you know, links between things. But at the moment, it does seem very bitty.
Yeah.
It really does.
But I always think that about his collection. I always think they feel very, very diverse, you know, very, very, and not necessarily always in a good way, you know, very bitty. There's lots and lots of different ideas.
I mean, that's very odd. Number 38, number 39.
I like number 39.
Yeah, number 39 I like as well. I kind of agree.
But so,
But
just
it
a bit
doesn't-
odd to
yeah.
put together. Maybe
Totally
that's the
different
point.
eras.
But maybe
Yeah.
that's the point. Maybe what he's trying to say is it's about all of them rather than maybe if you do see 8 in a room at once, that it hangs together.
What do we think about that much white? You know, Marc Jacobs famously said, I don't know that woman that wears all white.
She doesn't use the tube in London.
No.
It's filthy.
I mean, I do think it's a shame because I do love his use of colour a lot of the time, and I feel like he's, compared to the things that I personally normally like, he's quite minimalist.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I like about it is that use of colour. That's, you know, you can have some really you know, exceptional pastels or acid brights.
Yeah, and mixed in a very intriguing
and
way.
it makes it interesting, even for someone who doesn't necessarily like a minimalist aesthetic. Whereas, I mean, a lot of it, I mean, they look a bit like shrouds, to be honest. Those ones.
But I think given the focus so much on this one is kind of on silhouette and kind of this historical costume.
But there's not even enough of that. I
think
like,
he's tried to pare back all the colour
notes.
to do that, to be like, I'm thinking about silhouette and historical costume, silhouettes reworked in a modern way. So I understand the stripping back, but then
There he is.
Well, we had a little bit of colour at the end.
Yeah.
I thought it was
She's
good.
amazing.
I thought it was good that he brought back some of those earlier silhouettes in the white ones just towards the end, because that kind of reinforced them a little bit more.
Those shorts.
46, 45.
I do like it because it doesn't look like anything else. I do like that it's him. You know, you would get that catwalk image, and I think you would know it was him. And it's as much as we're talking about how his stuff can feel quite bitty, and I think he does have a clear aesthetic, and you can look at it and recognise it, which I think is intriguing because it's quite hard to describe. And then visually, I think, there's something in what he does that feels very clear.
But would you look at those and think that they were Dior?
But then I just think, what is Dior? Yeah, I think that's what kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and I'm really intrigued to hear what all you guys think. I just think,
And if Dior hadn't moved forward, I think they'd be seen as looking really a bit staid.
yeah,
I think we'll look back and feel that is Dior, because he's redefining it, maybe.
yeah.
I just think there's a way of mixing the two that makes for somehow a happier balance, and I think he's done that in the past. And I think he was getting towards that with the sort of silhouettes.
You mean nicer clothes?
I mean something that's like it's like an amalgam of Raf Simons and kind of what you think of as Dior, which I mean for me Dior is really all about the silhouette.
Yeah.
You know, and besides like a couple of looks from this, I'm not really getting that, I don't think.
I like the subtlety of it. It's interesting to see it in the close-ups. I love number 3 because that's very kind of street styling, this idea of like a top over long sleeves, and it is really cool. I love that kind of this idea of hiding away the excitement and the opulence. I think that's quite.
Like I said, that's got a strong silhouette to it, you know. And it's structured, but.
That is great.
I really like that.
And I like the way it looks like it's buttoned on to the skirt, which feels very like poppered on.
Yeah.
Baby grey.
It does look. It looks like really flat. There's something really pop arty about it.
Yeah.
Although there's that 18th century like reference.
Yeah.
It's just a shame there wasn't more of that. Really,
Yeah,
wasn't there?
yeah.
That's exciting.
But maybe he's putting us in a tumble dryer and he's banging us about, and in 6 months' time we're gonna love it and love it and love it and love it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there are collections which are a bit like that I'm kind of like, oh, you know, all right, I'll take my medicine, but I know I am gonna like it.
But I don't think he's a shouty designer in that way. I think that's why he's quite a cult designer in terms of, you know, there are people that are obsessed with his menswear. I think often it is for the subtleties, you know, it is for those kind of weird. He's not kind of like, this is my vision. He's never really been like that. So I think it wouldn't make sense, even though Dior is a huge name, to have him trying to do these huge collections. There's always a quietness to it.
But I do think he's making us work to understand it.
Yeah.
It's not on a plate.
No. I love the fastening on number 11. I think that's quite beautiful.
Funny little boot.
Yeah. I think there is something really jarring about it, but then you think that's really natural when you have stuff that's kind of really modern against stuff that's really, really 18th century, really, really costumey.
I think you're right. I think it's a collection that we'll need to process and look at if it's better and have a think about it. It's quite a lot to take in, isn't it?
I do wish we could see the patterning up closer as well.
Yeah.
That's so odd, number 18. I mean, it's just so weird.
It's a boiler suit. I love it. I always have time for a boiler suit. It's fabulous.
Just then going.
I love a boiler suit too, but that one doesn't seem too flattering.
It's looking at the cut of that sleeve as well, because for us here, it looks fairly basic, but actually you might find
It's
that
really,
the shoulders
it does look really curved, yeah.
really dropped, and that there's a twisted seam that's going around the back. Oops.
See, this, I think 22 I like. I think that's really interesting. And I imagine if someone was wearing that, you would want to touch it and open it and ask where it's from. And
And in a way, I guess that's 17th century menswear.
yeah, brought over. Are you seeing what we talked about with that kind of couture technique? Are you looking at it and thinking that it feels incredibly beautifully done?
I think it's really almost impossible to see on the screen because it's all the really close-up details. And it's things like, in couture, instead of just having one fabric and a lining, you'll have a fabric which is layered on top of another fabric and then the lining, because it helps make the first fabric last longer because they're built to last. So it's little things like that that kind of add weight to the garment that you can't necessarily see, but they're little techniques.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Who knows? You can have nice jersey t-shirts that he's done and then he's put them on chiffon. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. So we're not wowed then?
No.
No. You're despairing, Harriet.
I'm not. I actually think it's better than loads of stuff he's done. And up close, it's like, it's beautiful. Like, I think those pictures we see at the beginning don't tell half the story. It's not really very fair on him. But like that embroidery is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think, sometimes I think Raf doesn't have like movement in his clothes, they're a bit stiff.
Yeah.
But like those jackets have got movement and they sort of fly a bit, it's quite nice.
And it feels like they're the kind of clothes that would be a pleasure to own. You know, there are clothes that look great on a screen and that we would look at and go, oh my God, that's amazing. But actually, you think, does it give a lot to the wearer? Whereas it feels like this is the kind of thing actually that if you owned it, all those little details and little kind of the intricacies of the cut and the specific nature of the way it was cut to hang or embroidered would be quite exciting.
Yeah,
and
make you feel good.
Yeah, it would make you feel good, and it would offer you something new kind of every time you wore it. Whereas, and I think it can be difficult, I think, where you get used to judging whether something's good or whether it has immediate visual impacts, and you actually think, you know, that's kind of fueling this system of fashion where everything's really throwaway.
Yeah.
But that's kind of endemic with the streaming system, though, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
I know on panels I've done before, we've talked a lot about the idea that designers are creating collections that look good on a computer screen.
Yeah.
Because that's, and you know, we're all saying that now, like we can't really, there's so much of this that we can't see.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, like getting that close up, like that almost looks, they almost look like they're quilted. Those,
they look great. They look like
right.
those quilted petticoats.
Yeah.
With skater shorts. I'll have a pair.
Yeah, no, they are very cool. I'm a fan. Yeah, so that's interesting. So do we like it for that? Do we like it for the way that it does, as Raf Simons has always done, kind of buck the fashion system? You know, it's not screaming for Instagram loves and Facebook likes. It's trying to propose quieter things and more subtle messages, which I guess is quite refreshing. It's making us think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like it's quite narrative heavy and character heavy.
Yeah.
It's just trying to work out who they are.
Yeah.
Because it is putting lots of these references together, and it's just a new way of seeing them. So it's trying to understand what we're looking at, I think.
I quite like having something to ponder.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely.
So we should all report back to each other in a week when we've had some time to think about it.
I wonder what music he used.
Yeah, I don't know what music. Do you know what music was used? I don't know the season.
I think I like it.
I think I like it as well.
There are elements of it that I really like, and elements of it that I'm really ambivalent about.
There's nothing. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. But I kind of would rather have that than just. It feels like a lot of fashion is either really, really boring and really commercial, or if it's not that, it's just really kind of like lazily impactful. And impactful isn't a word, you know, where it's just kind of like in your face. You're like, oh, I like that, and then you're like, well, do I, or did I just kind of have to notice it? And I like that this isn't really commercial, but it's also not just like, boom, look at me, you're going to love me because I'm covered in this and really bright. And
it would be interesting to see in the showroom whether or not they do come in alternative colours.
Yeah, I think probably, you know, I think the white is definitely something that makes you kind of. I think so much would have got lost if it had been really, really colourful. I think people would have just focused on that, and I think it's great that those shorts are just in white, for example, because.
I think maybe he's referencing also. White was a very, very precious colour because everything was so filthy back in the day, and only an elite could wear white because there was too much mud around.
Yeah, and that's kind of quite interesting because white feels quite elitist now as well because everything's so colourful and so bright, and everyone's like, colour sells well online, so white's almost like this kind of quite pure, interesting thing that's kind of disappeared from fashion a little bit. So it's quite nice to see. Well, we should all go away and muse it a bit, but should we give him a round of applause for giving us something to think about?